Hello and welcome to our webinar. We're very pleased that you're able to join us today. Today we have Wilfred Emmanuel-Jones. Hang on, some feedback there. Sorry. So just for some information to share with you, we are going on live stream on YouTube. So we're only able to show 2 frames at the moment. And on, can I say, if you can turn your audio off and also turn off your video, and that way then we can get the message across in a more efficient way. Okay, is that coming through all right there, Jack? Give me a second. Great. So if you have any questions, please save them for the end and jot them down in Zoom or live stream, please. And if you're watching on live stream, we have a recording which we can send to you later on. So of course, now the aim is to end within an hour. And of course, we want to welcome Wilfred Emmanuel-Jones, the Black farmer, and we'll be learning more about your backstory. But we're also interested to know, have you got any suggestions on how we can cope in the current adversity? That's the one question we want to ask you. And how the farming industry is being affected by what's happening right now with the lockdown. So Wilfred, we turn it over to you to please share your thoughts with us. And I'll interject a couple of times with questions, but hopefully you won't mind that. All right.
Okay,
so
well, good morning to everybody. I must say this is quite a strange experience because this is the first time I've done anything like that. So I don't know how many people are listening to this, but hopefully there is an audience out there, and that what I have to say is going to be seen to be quite helpful. And I must say, these are extraordinary times. And one of the things that I'm a great believer in is that when you have extraordinary times, when you have times of great change, that is where there is opportunity. If you take, for example, we are having this conversation via Zoom. You know, just a couple of months ago, the idea that we would be having a conference or a conversation like this would have been very much the sort of the thing for the sort of the early adopters. But now it's something that everybody is doing in order to connect. So I believe that it may seem to be a very bizarre thing to say, but I believe that this coronavirus is a good thing. And the reason why I think it's a really good thing.
Why is that then?
And I know it's a pretty controversial thing to say, but I fundamentally believe it's a good thing. It's a good thing. It's a good thing because it's actually enabled the world to pause. We have an opportunity to press the reset button. We have an opportunity to look at the way that we've done things and to see if there is a better way. Just several months ago, we had people campaigning about, you know, what we're doing to the environment. We've had big campaigns about plastics and how that's destroying animals. We've had, you know, forest fires. You know, there's been real fundamental questions that humanity has been asking of itself. And then suddenly you have this virus comes along, a virus in sort of biblical proportions that actually means that we've all got to pause. We've got to stop and stop doing everything that we've taken comfort from, everything that we feel familiar with, to reassess. And so for me, the longer it goes on, the more people will need to reassess. And what they say, in a sense, I think in psychological terms, is that it takes about 60 days before people change their behavior. And I believe that if we do have enough times in order for people to change their behavior, we will actually then go forward into a better world. Well, that is my hope.
Do you think that we can cope with 60 days, though, of this?
Well, I think the thing about any change I think one of the interesting things, and I don't know if your audience knows this, but I wrote a book called Jeopardy: The Danger of Playing It Safe.
Yes,
And
I got your book. I've read it. It's quite good.
You got my book. Oh, thank you very much. Well, you see, I think the thing about people is that they're desperate for certainty, absolute desperate for certainty. And there's only one thing that is certain in this world, and that life is uncertain. And so at the moment, people are really scrabbling around, desperate to get back to some form of certainty. And I believe, look, the great test of how we survive as human beings is how we adapt to change. Now, those people who can adapt to change, they will go forward into a better world. Those who can't will become a victim of that. So the challenge that everybody has is not about going back to normal, because things will never, ever go back to normal. Is how we adapt to the change. And that's why it's a real opportunity for everybody to reevaluate the things that they felt was important and to realize it's about adapting, working from homes. All these things, which are probably seen as a luxury, will now become sort of commonplace. How we do business is going to absolutely change. How we're going to sort of connect is going to change. Just as a simple example, you know, one of the things I find fascinating with this sort of Zoom conversations is that actually, for the first time, you go into people's private space and you learn a lot about their, you know, I find when I'm watching these TV interviews, you know, you're looking at what books do they read, you know, what is their furniture like, what is the color of their walls like. So you get a real sort of reflection of the person. Rather than what they choose to present to the world when they go into work. So that in itself,
it makes it more personable, doesn't it?
It makes it a lot more personable. And I think that in itself is going to be interesting. And I would imagine you're going to see springing up out of that, people are going to be advised on what is the appropriate background to have when they're having their Zoom conversations, because everything that we now do will be telling people something about our sort of personalities. So just back to that sort of fundamental thing, is that it is fantastic. I mean, it's a horrible thing to happen in terms of if you get the virus. And I don't know if your audience knows, but I'm one of those that's sheltered because 5 years ago I had a stem cell transplant, and a stem cell transplant is a pretty dramatic transplant. I mean, most people don't sort of survive it. And if you do, you then sort of have a lifetime of things you have to live with. So if you were watching the news, the government talked about 1.4 million of us had to be sheltered. That means you can't go out, you know, because if we caught the virus, it'd be like a death sentence. So you'd think that somebody like me would be fearful of this, but I'm not. I'm just thinking, actually, I've got to do my best to try and not to catch it. So as you can imagine, I'm pretty finical about actually making sure I don't touch people, I don't touch anything. So if I get it, it would be bad luck, not because I haven't put all the things into place. And so
now's the time to build your immunity as well and get yourself fitter.
Yes, I mean, I think the thing is that, you know, in times of uncertainty, everybody's looking for answers. And I think that it's to go along knowing that you don't necessarily know the answers. And this is a real measurement of your own self-worth, your value, what you think about yourselves, because people's lives are full of, you know, they get a sense of themselves by things outside of themselves, by what job they do, you know, how they look. There's so many things in terms of people measure their value and worth. When you have nothing, the only thing that you have left is you and yourself. And it's about how you spend time to actually get to know yourself when there's no distractions, because, you know, work.
In your book, you talked about, I think, survivors as well as those who were sort of leaders. I forgot the term you
exactly. Yeah. So it's all about, most people in life do not actually do what they really want to do. And the reason why they don't do what they want to do is because they're living in fear, and fear is the thing that drives most people. Fear and guilt, and they end up doing things not because they want to. They do it because they're fearful of losing their jobs. You just think about it. If, let's say, a year ago, 2 years ago, you were fearful of losing your job, you were fearful of made redundant, this coronavirus come around and it says, you know, it's whatever fear you've had, it's just knocked all of those things out of the window. So
yeah,
a lot of people would have lived in survival mode. They think, oh shit, I got to do this, because if I don't, I won't be able to pay the mortgage. I won't be able to do any of this. And, you know, coronavirus comes around and just puts a real strike across that. So it could be a real learning lesson that you could spend your lifetime living in fear, and therefore operating in survival mode, not doing the things that make you happy, not being fulfilled. And so if there's one lesson that you should learn from this crisis, is that there is no value in living in survival mode, because something might come along that will actually take away the very thing that you're dependent on for your own survival. And I just say, look, one of the things I also talk about in my book is that people have a choice. And the choice they have in order to fulfill their dreams or to live the life they want to live, the choice is you have to decide whether you want to belong. And what I mean by belonging is that you belong to part of a group, you belong part of a community. And within that group and community, there are rules about what you do, what you can't do. Now, you have a choice between belonging or being. Now, to be means that you go with actually what you feel to be important to you. Now, it's pretty lonely being a beer, because you don't have any anchors, you don't have anything to sort of guide you. But any entrepreneur, anybody who fulfills their dream at one stage has to decide to be, regardless of what other people might think. So many people might want to do things, but they say, oh my mom might disagree, my parents might not like it, my friends may think that it's a crazy idea. And that stops them from doing what they want to do. Well, what I'm saying is that there comes a point you have to decide to let go of what other people might think and just have the courage to go with it.
Now that you mention that, you have quite a story to tell about how you went a bit from rags to riches, if you like. So that's just my term. But can you share with us some of the adversities that you went through to where you are now?
Yeah, I hope this camera is not going to fall over, but if it does, I'll pick it up again. I'm trying to balance it, because one of the things I think that probably somebody's going to have to invent some sort of stand so you could actually put the phone, have your arms around, because you know I tend to be quite animated, and also be able to pick up the sound on the mic. Anyhow, so back to my story. I was born in Jamaica. I'm in fact one of the Windrush generation, and my parents came over to this country in the 1957. 1957 when I was born. My parents came over in the 60s, and at that time, what happened is that a lot of the people left their children to be brought up by relatives until they're able to earn enough money for their children to be brought over to this country. So I was born in a place called Clarendon, Frankfield, and if you went there today, back in Jamaica, they call that, you know, that's in the bush, you know, that's right in the heart of the island. And my parents lived in Birmingham, so I was brought up in Birmingham, and I was brought up in a place called Small Heath. Now, Small Heath at the time, and I don't know what it's like today, but at the time, it's one of those classic inner city areas that I can remember on one side of us, we had the Irish that was hated by the host community. We had the Asians that was also hated by the host community. And then you had us that was hated by the host community. Not only were we hated by the host community, but we all hated each other. So it was all sort of, you know, immigrants all trying to fight to be the highest out of the dustbin heap. And so my memories of that time was that, you know, it was very, very poor. And there was 11 of us in my family. Wow. So back in those days, my parents hadn't sort of grasped the idea that 11 children in this country is probably not a good idea.
No, too many.
You know, just to try and feed them was going to be sort of quite challenging.
Yeah.
And so we lived in one of those sort of classic 2 up, 2 down terrace houses. So you can imagine that's very, very cramped. There was 3 to a bed. And as a way of supplementing the family income, my father had an allotment. And and on that allotment, he would grow vegetables, fruits, and all that sort of stuff. And it was my job as eldest boy to look after this allotment. And this allotment really became an oasis from the sort of misery that I was surrounded by. And
Yes.
I absolutely loved being on this allotment. And, you know, it gave me a sense of freedom. I mean, when you're brought up in a sort of, in a challenging area, you spend most of the time looking over your shoulder, you know, trying to make sure you don't get beaten up or something like that. And I can remember when I was on this allotment, I made myself a promise that one day I would like to own my own farm. I just love that sense of space. Now, I didn't know how I was going to do it, but one of the things that I think is really important, and it's one of the things I'd spend a lot of time talking to kids about when I go and do my talks at schools, is that the most important thing in life is to have the courage to have a dream. Now, having a dream is a very much an American idea. The Americans celebrate the fact that you could actually start from nothing and build up and become something. In the UK, we tend to poo-poo that sort of attitude. It's sort of this person's trying to get above their station. That actually,
it's a shame, though, isn't it?
It is a shame, and I think that it's probably to do with our class, the British class system, where, you know, everybody needs to have their certain place in life, and those of us from the immigrant background and the ethnic community suffer from that, you know, because we're sort of low down in the pecking order. We tend to be forgotten unless we're prepared to go and fight for our rightful place.
Which is what you did, isn't it?
Which is definitely what my story is that, you know, my color was not going to become a barrier to the things that I wanted to achieve. Because still in our society, that actually we as people of color get pigeonholed, think, well, if you're this color, you know, this person does sports or they do rap music, and then they becoming a farmer. It's like, bloody hell, that doesn't make sense. And so I'll tell you the story how what had happened in my case. So I went, so back to my story, I went to the local secondary modern school in Birmingham. And this school was a pretty awful place, really, because it was a sort of place where the teachers didn't really expect much of you. That most of the people who went to that school didn't really get a good education. They policed us rather than educate us. You know, we were sort of on society's dustbin heap, and you would either end up in prison or you'll end up doing a sort of menial job and, you know, living on society's dustbin heap, as I call it. So, and the other thing that made life quite difficult for me when I was at school is that I'm dyslexic. Now, in those days, people had no idea what dyslexia was. And so you were just put down as being stupid or thick or being difficult. You know, I spent most of the time at the headmaster's office. I mean, in those days, they used to be able to cane you. So, I mean, I used to get caned all the time because I was rather disruptive. So at 16, I left school without any qualifications. I could hardly read and write. And then I wanted to get away from home. And that the only thing available to me was to join the army. Now, the one thing you do not do is that if you're a black guy with an attitude, you do not join the army, because if you join the army, you're going to get your head kicked in. And you can imagine.
But you did anyway.
I did.
You did anyway.
And you can imagine that, you know, for a year they tried to lick me into shape, and you know, they did some pretty brutal things in terms of, you know, the thing about being an entrepreneur and being in the military, the two things do not go together. The military is all about doing as you're told. Being an entrepreneur is always about challenging the convention. Everything about me is to question, to ask why. It doesn't work in the army. You do as you're told and you shut up, you know, or
That's
else.
Right.
And yeah, I got kicked out of the army. So I have a dishonorable discharge to my name, which is something that I sort of wear with pride. And then, so I was around 18, and you could see that everything that everybody had predicted would probably happen to me. It looked as though I was set to become one of life's failures. And believe it or not, in those days, if you were useless at everything, there was then only one option available to you, and that was catering. So catering was a profession that had ex-offenders, people who could do anything. They just thought, well, they used to go, go and become a cook. So I went to the local catering college in the West Midlands and trained to be a chef. And it's not like today. Chefing is a pretty glamorous profession. Back in those days, it was the profession for the thickos, the real stupid people, which I was one of them. And so I went and I did my catering course, and then I ended up working in various hamburger joints and various places, and I liked it. What I liked is I liked the speed, and it was paying me money, but I was getting into survival mode. All too often in life, people get to a place where they're managing to pay the bills, they're managing to go out, have a bit of a good time, and that's enough. But again, the thing I'm really grateful for is having that dream, because that dream was always saying to me, well, boy, you can either spend your life flipping burgers, or you need to get up on your ass to try and achieve this dream. And so I can remember at the time, there used to be, television was very important back in those days, and this would be a fantastic documentary series on called 40 Minutes, and I used to love that series. And I thought, oh, and you know what, I would like to go and work in television as a producer director. So
well done for having that dream.
Yeah, well, you can imagine all of my family and friends just like, this guy is nuts, basically, because to work in television, you need to have a degree. It's people who've been to Oxford and Cambridge. It's a very, very privileged profession. So who the hell does he think he is? So people just thought I was mad. But I've lived my life on these two principles. And I believe that anybody who achieves anything in life, achieves it with these two principles. And any successful man, any successful woman, business person, athlete will have these two things. The first thing, ruthlessly focused. And what I mean by ruthlessly focused is that you're able to sort of blot out the white noise of living. And what I mean by the white noise of living is that people get distracted by all these things that really don't matter. That the moment you focus onto one single thing that you want, it is far more achievable. So that's the first thing, ruthless focus.
Okay.
Now the second thing, ruthless focus. And you'll see any successful athlete, you'll see they're focused. They get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to run. They'll run on Christmas Day. They don't care about birthdays. They don't care about anything. Focus, 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 focus.
And a routine, I think, too, doesn't it?
Whatever does you is that you're focused. Your whole world becomes that dream. That's the key thing. Everybody else is out enjoying themselves, having parties. You are focused. Come out and have a drink with us. No, I got to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do my run. That sort of focus. Now, that's the first thing. Now, the second thing, and this is more important than the first thing, is that you need to have passion. And the reason why I say you need to have passion is because passion defies reason. It defies logic. It makes you get over the hurdles that reason and logic will say you can't do it. So passion drives you to do the impossible. So if you don't have passion, it doesn't matter. You can be as focused as if you like. If you don't have passion, you will not achieve your dreams. And one of the people always ask me, well, about this thing called passion. Well, we all have experience of passion. And the way that we have experience of passion is when we fall in love. We will know of our experience when there is someone that we're attracted to, that we love. Our friends will look at us and think, this person has got it bad because we do remarkable things. We do things that just defy all reasons. We put everything aside. Now, a successful business person has that same sort of mentality. It is like falling in love, nothing gets in the way. So again, those two factors are the key things you need to achieve anything. So taking those principles on board, I thought, right, I'm going to write to the BBC. And I had something called the Radio Times, and I wrote to the BBC, and not one of them, to hundreds and hundreds of people I wrote to, and not one of them wrote back to me. I thought, right, I'm not going to give up there. I'd ring them. Nobody would take my calls. And so, right. at the time, at the BBC Peppermint in Birmingham, they had security guards, and they had these barriers that, you know, would let people in and out. So I went to the security guard and says, look, can I come and help you lift the barrier up and down? Not getting paid for it.
Well done.
You know, but you know, when it's cold and wet outside, I think with some stupid black guy, if he wants to do that, that's all right with me. So I did that for months, lifting this bloody barrier up and down. From that, I then managed to get a job as a cleaner, because the cleaners would go in and clean the offices, and I did that for about another year, cleaning the office. And then after doing that, it took me about 2 years this. Then after doing that, I met a guy, and I still remember his name. His name was Jock Gallagher. I met him, and he said, at BBC Peppermint, he was a senior executive producer, and he took me to his office, and he chatted to me for about an hour, and he says, "Look, you're not the sort of guy that we would employ in television, because, you know, A, you don't have the educational background, and B, you got a bit of an attitude, you know, you got a bit of an attitude problem." And he said this, he said, "But, you know, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to give you a job as a general runner. And what that means is that you do all the shit work that nobody wants to do, which is that you do making the coffee, you know, cleaning, fetching and carrying." He said, "I'll give you a job
somewhere.
I'll give you a job as a runner for 3 months, and then we'll see what happens." Now, that man giving me that break then started up a career in television. And the other thing that I say to people is this: what you need to do in life is find your guardian angels, the people who will go out of their way to give you a break.
So and who was your guardian angel?
Jock Gallagher.
Right.
He gave me a break. And everything that I've achieved in my life, somebody has gone out of their way to give me a break. I would never, ever have got that opportunity by going down the conventional route. You know, people waste their time filling in application forms. The moment you fill in an application form, you're part of a lottery. And especially if you're a person of color, you're part of a lottery. And the idea that you could choose the right person by, you know, CVs and all these sophisticated algorithms they now have in terms of choosing an employer is a nonsense. I believe that one of the great essence of our humanity is that people being able to sense things about people, and that sense things about people is by giving them a break. And entrepreneurialism is that, you know, it defies all algorithms, it defies all rational ways of thinking. There's just something about people that actually makes them different. And the people that have given me my breaks, they've spotted that, and they've put themselves on the line for that. They're all there, and they come to people, and what you have to do is have the courage to spot it. And when you spot it, you seize it, because those people help you on the road to achieve all the successes. I would never, ever have achieved anything in my life unless I found those people. And several of them came along, and there's something about them that says, well, this boy, you know, he's prepared to do what it takes. He's worth a break. So I started up as a runner. I then went on to be a researcher. I then went on to be a sort of producer. And then my claim to fame is that I then traveled the world making films about food and drink. At that time, there was a very popular program called the BBC Food and Drink Program. Well, here's another story. My boss, he was sort of responsible for the whole celebrity chef culture. It was my job to break in these new celebrity chefs. And so people like Gordon Ramsay, I gave him his first break in television. And what had happened is that my boss at the time recognized that, you know, these chefs are pretty hard men, tough men. You know, they're from the streets. They don't take any shit from anybody. And that a lot of the sort of middle-class producers, directors were intimidated by these people because, you know, these guys speak in a different language.
Yes.
Now, my boss, and, you know, these chefs were the sort of guys that will take you outside to sort a problem out. And so my boss knew that I was the sort of person that wouldn't be intimidated by them. You know, if they wanted to go outside to sort a problem out, I'd be quite happy to go and oblige. And so what they needed was to have somebody that was not intimidated by them. So you can imagine something like Gordon Ramsay. He's made a living out of intimidating people. So you need to be pretty tough. So I could tell you some amazing stories about when I first started working with him, and you look at him now and the success he's become, and when he started, totally different person. But to give his credit, he's done pretty well. So I was at the BBC for about 15 years, and it's worth taking a pause here, because all too often what happens is that people look at that and think, so a lot of people say, by the way that I speak, they then assume, well, he's been to university, he's got a good background, he's been brought up with privilege. But, this is a boy from the streets, from the gutter, from nowhere. And here I am at the BBC, working amongst middle-class people, doing a very, very good job, a job that most people would love to have. And then that dream that I had always was there reminding me is not to get into survival mode, because you would think that actually, shut up, boy, be grateful for where you are, keep your head down, because, you're better here than you were on the goddamn streets. But that is the mistake that people make in life, because the moment they think that they've found certainty, that there's some security around them, as the coronaviruses demonstrate, life comes along and drags that away. And
it throws everything out. Yeah.
It rules everything out. So that's why this idea that you should never get comfortable, never get into survival mode is a really, really important thing to do. And so with that dream, I thought, well, I'm having a great time at the BBC, but I'm not going to really earn enough money working at the BBC to buy my farm. The only way that I'm going to do that is if I start my own business.
Right.
And then
what business was it you started?
Pardon?
What business did you start at that point?
Well, my first business that I started was a marketing agency. So what happened was that I decided, look, my expertise was food and drink. So I decided that I was going to start a marketing agency. Now, this is an important part of my story, because again, what happened, I remember deciding that I was going to leave the BBC. I was going to start. Could you see me? Hold on, somebody's trying to.
You've just gone to your picture, but that's fine.
Hold on. Now I've come back. Somebody was trying to
come
read me back now. Yeah.
Okay.
Where was I? So I decided I was going to start my own business, and then I had just enough money to pay my mortgage for 3 months.
Wow.
Now, what I was saying earlier on is that people have dreams of things they would like to do, and the thing that stops them doing that is fear of what would happen if it goes wrong. Will they end up on the streets? And that's why they stay in survival mode. And then also, you said to have the courage that you've only got money to pay your mortgage for 3 months, no clients, and you're starting up a business. I just got married, just had a child, nothing. So that is really putting everything on the line.
Yeah.
Everything on the line.
Yeah.
And by getting rid of the safety nets, it focuses the mind. It really does. So, I worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's the sort of attitude that you need to have if you're going to be starting your own business.
That's one of the laser focus you talked about.
Oh yeah, you've got to have that laser focus. And one of the things I say to people, the reason why a lot of businesses fail within the first year, within the first 3 years, is people don't recognize that, it is critical. And I say to people, go to intensive care and just watch that patient, watch the people in intensive care and those people on life support. And what you'll realize is the absolute focus for that patient to survive. That's the attitude you need to have when you start a business in the first year. The focus about making it survive, because if you don't, it will die, is really, really important to have in your mind. People want to have everything. They want to get, I'm amazed when I say, I want to start a business. I want to go on holiday. I want to have, I want to live like normal people. You can't. You can't. There is a sacrifice you have to make, is that you can't be like ordinary people. You have to sacrifice something. So again, what I found when I started that business is that, people could see that I was hungry. that I prepared to do anything. And that's when I would then get my first clients. And so I worked on brands. I developed brands like Lloyd Grocery sauces, Kettle Chips, Plymouth Gin, Cobra Beer. Back in the day, they would just start off challenger brands. Nobody had known about them. And so I worked on those brands. And I built that business up. And after about 15 years, that gave me the money to buy my farm.
Oh, well done.
So one of the things I always say to people, dream early, because it takes a shit of a long time to fulfill your dreams. Yes. It took me about 35 years to fulfill that dream. So, you know, it takes, and the thing about living in our instant society, everybody wants it quickly. It doesn't happen quickly. It's a marathon. You know, you got to keep going. You got to keep going. You got to keep going. So
tell us about the farm then. How did you manage to get there to the farm? And
so what I did, so what happened then is that I had enough money to buy my farm, and I used to go down on holiday in the southwest, in Devon and Cornwall. And at the time, a lot of farmers were getting out of farming because, you know, they were sort of struggling. And I saw this farm just outside Launceston, or Lanston, as they say.
Lanston, yeah.
And you know, it was an old dairy farm, so I decided to buy it, and then put a lot of money into sort of, you know, doing the place up. When I bought it, didn't have any electricity, didn't have running water. I mean, it was a bit of a mess. And what I did, you see, one of the things that I'm a great believer in is that it's outsiders who bring about change, because outsiders could see the opportunity. And when I was down there, the first thing is that when I bought this farm, all of my friends in London would say, "Boy, what are you going to go and buy a farm down there for? You know, don't they lynch black people down there? You know, the idea
it's not that bad
that a black person wants to go down to the countryside. You know, people just can't understand it. They just think, shit, you know, is it safe down there?" And I can remember that was a big conversation. And then when I was down there, all the white people there couldn't understand it. They thought, shit, what's a black person wanting to come down here? Anybody with any sense was getting out of bloody farming. Why is he coming down here? And they thought it was a cover for growing marijuana or something like that. You know, that's what they say. So if you don't fit the stereotype of what black people should do, it causes sort of confusion. And that's where the opportunity is also. So what I sort of realized was that actually there's this massive gap between urban and rural Britain, that they didn't really understand the two worlds. The idea of a black person down there was just really confusing. People just couldn't understand it. And that's when I said, oh, there's an opportunity here. So I decided that actually I'm going to create a brand that will bridge both worlds. And what I wanted to do was to create a product that was a quintessentially British product, that was mainstream, that was aimed at the mainstream market, not just at the ethnic market, but totally mainstream and very, very British. So I found a manufacturer down there, and then I thought, what I'm going to do something that the British love, and the British love their sausages. Yes. So I thought, I'm going to do a really great sausage, gluten-free, all of that sort of stuff. So I got the product, and I said, right, what am I going to call this brand? And suddenly it came to me, all of my next door neighbors down there used to call me the Black Farmer. And I thought, shit, you know, that's a pretty good brand name. Not only is it a very, very good brand name, but there's no one else out there that could nick the idea.
No.
And it also has an edge to it. In these sort of politically correct times, people are slightly confused. Well, can he say that? You know, are there black farmers? It starts to get people to start questioning their
talking about it as well.
And talking about it. And so the key about marketing is that that's what you've got to do. You've got to get people to start thinking, now, what is this about? Is it real? Do you really have a farm? Do you really do farming? And then that's the key thing that you basically want. Now, on my farm, in the great scheme, I've only got a 30-acre farm. So in farming circles, that's just nothing. But, you know, for me, it's like the world, because it took me 35 years to get there. And what we do on my farm is that we have, we sort of what they call finishing up. We have beef cattle and milk. And, you know, as you could tell that, you know, I'm not a hands-on farmer. my next door neighbor does all of that work. You know, I'm more like sort of Prince Charles type farmer.
You're the front man.
I'm the front man. I call myself the gentleman farmer. And so having developed that product, I then decided that actually I want to try and sell it in the supermarkets. And everything that you hear about the supermarkets is true. That, you know, to try and get any products in, it's just really, really, really difficult and challenging. And
so it must have been harder for you then, being a black man, trying to get your
Oh yeah, people couldn't understand it. You know, when I used to go and see the buyers, they said, you know, what's all this about? Is it sausages for black people and things like that? You know what I mean? So when you're challenging the stereotype, it just confuses people, because what people like to do is put everybody in boxes, really. And so I would then sort of, you know, confuse them. And so what is interesting is that when I launched my brand, I launched it at the time of another big revolution. So what I think is happening today is another big revolution in terms of our changes that we're about to do. The big revolution at that time was just start of the big internet explosion. So Facebook had just started, right. Twitter didn't exist. All of this social media and like all the stuff that we're now doing, a just tiny start there. And what that actually meant is that before the social media explosion, the only way you could get in touch with your consumers was through what I call the gatekeepers. And the gatekeepers were television, radio, magazines, newspapers, to advertise.
All the media, really.
All the media. You had to advertise through these channels to get your message across. And they had a lot of power and they cost a fortune. The moment that social media came along, you could have a direct relationship with your consumer without going through the gatekeepers. The great irony now is that the great gatekeepers are the likes of YouTube and Facebook and all that sort of thing, Google, but that's another subject. They're the new gatekeepers. But what I did is that I recognized that actually, when I went to see all of the buyers, and I told them about that I wanted to launch these sausages, all of them said no. They said they weren't interested at all. They just couldn't understand it. So what I decided to do is that I would go around the country and do a massive sampling program with all, you know, all these country fairs and all that sort of stuff that we have around the country, and get people to sample my sausages. And at the same time, what I did is on my website, I put all the names, telephone numbers and addresses of all the buyers on my website. And I simply said to people, if you really, really like these sausages, write to the buyer and complain, why aren't these products in the supermarket? And as God is my witness, that's how I got my listing. Because in terms of the supermarket, they don't really care about suppliers. The people they really care about are the consumers. Yes. And the key thing about any brand is to get your consumers on your side. And if your consumers are on your side, they'll fight for you. They'll make things happen. And my brand has grown because the consumers have fought for me. It would never have existed. So again, you know, especially in the Southwest, you know, I've become like their adopted son, really, you know, to come down there, to be fighting their corner and to be very, very, very supportive. And so in all things, to be successful, it's about how do you create these relationships, whether that's relationships with your business colleagues or with your consumer. All too often, people put their consumer at the bottom of their list of priorities, but actually it is really important that you put them on the top of your priorities and that you have a really strong relationship with them. I mean, I've been invited to people's weddings that I've never ever met. Now, that is a real testament of somebody who feels engaged in a brand. And the biggest mistake that most people make when they are creating a brand is that they think people are buying into the brand because of the product. And that's a fundamental mistake. It's not why people buy into a brand. You have to have a good product, i.e., you know, if you're going to sell rubbish, people are not going to support you. But actually, the reason why people buy the Black Farmer is because, yes, they expect you to have be really nice and taste and have all those wonderful cues, but they buy into the brand because of what it stands for. That's why people buy into things, what it says about themselves, what it stands for. And that is really, really important. What is your belief system? what do you stand for? And then somehow that is what people pick up.
Very good. Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that information. But I did have a question for you, though. I mean, today on the radio, or TV rather, we were hearing that some of the farmers are really quite distressed. One even saying they had to throw away milk that was just flowing, just flowing from them. They'd already had it, but they had to get rid of it because nobody was buying it. The shops, it was meant to go to cafes and things like that.
Well, yeah.
So
I mean, I think
how is that affecting your business now?
Well, in my business, because we do sausages, we do chickens, we do eggs. They're staples, and so fingers crossed. It's a good time for us to be doing business. Okay. But, anything could happen where that could be changed. So that's why I don't sit down and sort of expect everything to continue the way it does. But the thing is that things are changing, that it is going to be distressing for lots of people. And that, my view is that, here's an example. I'm here in London at the moment, okay? I'm not down on my farm. You'd think in a time like this, the place to be would be down in Devon. You're away from any problem. I wouldn't have any problem with self-isolating, but the reason that I'm here is that I have to have treatment at Guy's Hospital as part of, when I was telling you earlier on that I had a stem cell transplant, and I have to have something called ECP. Okay. So I'm here in my flat in London. Okay. It'd be nice if I was down in Devon, but there's a lot I've got to be grateful for. I've had an extra 6 years of life. I've had a lot of fantastic sort of experiences. So the point I'm making is that during these times, there is going to be pain. Yeah. And rather than letting that pain become, make you distressed, is to understand and to accept that things are never going to be the same. And that it's about seeing where the opportunity is going to come. And one of the things I think will come from it really is that a lot of businesses will fail, but out of that will come new businesses, new opportunities. I would like to see that perhaps, the high street that was sort of dying for decades might see some sort of revival. And that I just think that
how do you see that happening, though, the high street? Because a lot of them were on the brink of collapse, really.
Well,
so
I tell you, here's some interesting statistics that's what I find quite interesting here. One of the things that's selling a lot of at the moment is eggs. It's
and
really
toilet paper.
Huh?
And toilet paper.
And toilet paper is because of a psychological thing, but these are the things that's giving you indications of what changes. Why do you think so many eggs are being sold at the moment?
That's a good question. Why do you think
fine.
So?
Well, the reason why is because a lot more people are doing home baking. So so you can't get eggs, you can't get flour, you can't get yeast. So people are now baking. The other things that people are doing is that they're growing their vegetables. You can't get vegetable seeds, you can't get vegetable plants. So that tells you there's a little subtle changes. So the very thing before this corona crisis, it was all about food on the go, just in time. It was about convenience. And so that because people have been locked down, they've started to become personally creative, creating their own breads, creating their own cakes, making their own jams, making their own things. So by people doing that, they then are starting to have an appreciation of the artisan way of doing things. Now that is what I find phenomenal. Just looking at the data, my God, these sort of products are now selling like hotcakes that you would never ever think. Now, when we eventually come out of lockdown, some of the things that people would have experienced, or some of the things they felt they might have been fearful of, they would find out actually it's not as difficult as they probably first assumed. And then how they then take that into the sort of the future. And therefore there'll be, a greater appreciation of things. What will happen is that having had the experience of working from home, it costs a lot of money to run an office. It costs a lot of money.
Yes.
So
Yes.
if you have a system where actually people can work from home, and then you could probably gather, you know, once a week or twice a week. So when you're gathering, it's about connecting rather than going for a place of work. That has to be better for people's well-being. It has to have financially benefit. And then also when people have time to do all of the things that gives them pleasure, they will then appreciate the smaller companies on the high streets doing little things, artisan things. There'll be a greater appreciation for it rather than convenience.
Okay, well, that sounds brilliant. Sounds good. So I think what we can do, what I'm hoping to do, if I can get my tech guy on this, is we can open up now for questions.
Okay.
And if you have a few more minutes, I take it.
Yeah.
So
I'm good.
I'm going to see if we can get other people's videos on here, or if anybody wants to ask a question, I'm going to start unmuting people now, and you can ask your questions if you have any. Let's see if we can get there. Just bear with me a minute. I see if we can get some audio on here as well. Okay, my tech guy is saying we'll start the video a little bit later, but if anyone has any questions, I think Patricia. Oh yes, did you want to ask your question, Patricia? You're unmuted.
Oh yes, great. I've taken 6 pages of notes, Wilfred. Can't write fast enough.
Okay.
I'd love to have a chat with you because we're aligned so well. But would you comment, or do you have a comment on glyphosate, the use of glyphosate on our crops, and its relationship to our not having the immune system to fight this virus?
Well, I'm not really qualified to sort of answer that sort of question, really. So all I can do is answer things from a personal basis. Now, at the moment, I would say, I don't know whether you heard what I was saying earlier on, is that the reason that I'm part of that 1.4 million sheltered group is because I have a compromised immune system. And that obviously your immune system is very, very important in fighting viruses. So I know, for example, every winter I get battered by viruses because I have a compromised immune system. So what that actually says is that the stronger your immune system, the better it's going to be for fighting any sort of virus. Now, one of the things and the complication with your sort of argument is that what I think that I've heard is that when people get into a critical condition with this virus is when their immune system goes into overdrive. And there is some debate that actually people with a more reduced immune system do better than people with a healthier immune system. So I don't know, because I am not the scientist. So what is interesting, and which might challenge a lot of people's view, is that it looks as though the people who get really critical ill is because they've got such a healthy immune system, it goes against them in this case. But you know, generally having a healthy immune system is a positive thing. But in this case, you know, it's trying to get it not to overreact. And I think a lot of people's conditions, some people's conditions, are based on a overreactive immune system. So immunity is good. You know, one of my great beliefs is that in farming generally, the more convenient farming is to machinery and mechanized, I don't think that is a good thing. And so actually by us seeing that getting things done in smaller, I believe long term will be a good thing. So if you think about it at the moment, back into my own country, like Jamaica. Now, Jamaica is a very, very lush country, but most of the food that they eat in that country is imported from America. And the food that is imported is a cheap food that the Americans don't want to eat, like, you know, fatty bits of the pork and all that sort of stuff. And so what happens is in somewhere like America, it is cheaper to produce food because they have vast lands. So that's what people need to understand about farming, is that if you've got vast swathes of land, it's a very easy, effective way of farming. Whereas if you've got small slots, it's not efficient. And so what we need to do is that we need to get a balance between efficiency and all. So the small is where you then have all the specialisms. And what I believe we should be doing in this country is that rather than compete with sort of having vast swathes of land where you just basically spray with all pesticides and things like that, is to sort of specialize. Let me just go and make one final point on this, is that I do, in my range, I do an antibiotic-free pork. Ooh. Now, to do antibiotic-free pork is really difficult. And the only way you could do that is small. So what happens is that in Scotland, I've got a farmer who has a piece of land where it's not linked to anything, and we're the only farm in the whole of the UK that does antibiotic-free pork. Because once you start sort of breeding animals in in large quantities, you need antibiotics so then they pick up all these infections and sort of diseases, and that antibiotic-free pork could only be done in small structures, and there's a growing market for things like that. I could see in the future people wanting to buy antibiotic-free chicken and all those sort of stuff, but they could only be done small, and it would be a bit more expensive. So I've gone round in circles answering your questions, but hopefully giving you some of my thoughts about what I think about immunity and pesticides.
Well, thank you very much.
I had a question as well. If anybody has a question, you can raise your hand as well so that we can unmute you, but we have to keep you muted for the moment. But I had a question too. I know you said that you have certain types of, well, you have the gluten-free sausage, but do you also have a vegan, or have any plans for having a vegetarian or vegan product to put on the shelf? Or do you have it already?
No, I don't have any vegan products, but that is what I want to do.
That's
is to look at that. Is to look at that sort of stuff, because yeah, I mean, everything that we do is now being sort of challenged. Well, what I do in terms of my products, all of my products are higher welfare. You know, I just think it's criminal to see all the industrialization of meat production is not good, and I don't believe it's sustainable. And so all of my products are very what they call higher welfare, so they'll be organic or they'll be free range. They won't be the standard stuff.
Yes. All right. One question I do have, or somebody's left a question: have you ever felt unconfident or dealt with moments of self-doubt, lack of confidence, etc.? And
oh yeah, I mean, look, I've always got the doubts, and that, you know, what happens, you know, is that we're all having to deal with the fear of whether we got it right, whether we've done the right thing. Now, one of the things I say to people is this: most people live their lives thinking the most important thing to do is not to make a mistake. If you're living like that, you're living in survival mode. The only way to measure that you're living your life to a full is you're able to look back at mistakes you've made. So the challenge to all of your listeners is this: for them to ask themselves, when was the last time they made a mistake? And if it was a long time ago, that's an indication that you're not living, you're slumming it, you're coasting along. It's the mistakes that you make that says you're living, you learn from it, and you move on. And so you should always have that feeling of doubt and being not sure that you do get it wrong. To sit here and say, no, man, I'm feeling always good and I never make a mistake, means I'm just slumming it. It's always continuously thinking, actually, I'm not too sure. But I'm not going to punish myself, or I don't think I'm a bad person because I get it wrong. Getting it wrong is an indication that I'm actually living life.
Great. Okay. So we're going to check to see if there's any more questions. Anybody else has a question, you can raise your hand or you can drop us a note in the chat box. Let's just see, just bear with me there, Wilfred. I know there's a few more questions, but I'm unable to check the YouTube. I know there's a few people on YouTube as well that have been checking in, because as I said, this is going live stream. But I want to thank you, Wilfred, for your talk.
I'm sorry. I mean, I could hold on a bit longer. If somebody...
you have some time. Okay. Yeah. So bear with me. Patricia, are you able to check to see if there's anything on YouTube? Any questions you can leave us? In the meantime, I know you said that you were trying to bring the urban and the rural together, and there's not that many urban people, if you like, and people of color down here in the Southwest, because I'm in Exeter and Devon. So that was one of my questions: is how are you, or what have you done to help sort of bring people together and help people of color in the Southwest, or help them to move to the Southwest? Well, this is a viable place to live.
Okay, so what this is what I fundamentally believe is that when any immigrant family, any immigrant population, like in my parents, you know, they all went to the urban centers. The irony is that my parents are originally from rural backgrounds. They were farmers, they were subsistence farmers, but they went to where the work was. So the likes of Birmingham, Manchester, London. And what happened is, because of the hostility that they were greeted with when they came here, they found what are sort of bastions of security amongst each other. And so therefore, what has happened is that everybody's grown up within these areas feeling safe and feeling accepted. And therefore, there's a sense to venture out is then going to be going into sort of difficult territory, and then you'd be having to put up with abuse, or, you know, not being appreciated. Because, you know, there are some parts of the UK, especially rural parts of the UK, where they will still refer to you as coloured rather than black. And it's not because they're being rude, it's because in their minds, you know, coloured is more polite than black. And so if you're a black person, you're going to get offended by that. You know, don't even go there. It's about understanding that where people's heads at. And I say, look, you know, our parents came here, they slogged to death to sort of establish themselves. And therefore, it is our duty, those of us who are second, third generation, to, in a sense, spread out from these sort of bastions of familiarity to the rest of Britain, to claim our part of Britain. So for me, to have land, to have something tangible that is fundamentally Britain, there's a real ownership rather than, you know, passing through. You know, so our parents came thinking that one day they'll go back, only to realize that this is now home. And it's for us, the second and third, to really establish. So if you feel that actually being in a rural environment is right for you, don't then feel that you can't because of the color of your skin. It is your job. It is, you know, our parents were the pioneers coming here in the first place. You know, those of us in the second, third generation, we are also pioneers. It is for us to go and do all of these things, to be able to claim our right to be here, to help change culture. So the more of us that do that, the more it changes the culture. Not only changes the culture, but it would also change farming, change attitudes. Because one of the things that I say when I go and talk to ethnic groups is that a lot of the foods that, you know, the ethnic communities like are imported. And there's no reason why they can't be grown in this country. And the reason why they're not grown in this country is because there isn't that expertise there. Now, I just think, you know, if people from ethnic backgrounds got together, got pieces of land, started to do things, we're bringing something new and different. So we can't wait to be invited. We have to go and claim it. That is the difference. If you're waiting to be invited, you're going to be waiting forever. We have to claim it. So,
okay, I appreciate that. But will you then try and invite some down here to your farm?
Before I got ill, I used to run something called the Black Farmer Scholarship Scheme. And the whole idea behind that is to get people from the inner cities to come stay on my farm. They'll come for a week, show them about farming, they go around and help in other farms, so they could get a feeling of what it's like to work and live in rural Britain. Because I actually believe there's a lot of people from ethnic backgrounds who would probably prefer being in a rural environment, but they just don't know how to go about it.
Okay.
But so at the moment, it's not something I could do, because obviously having to manage my illness and run my business, I don't really have the physical time to sort of do that. So I do that in trying to do talks like this.
I appreciate that. All right. I think at this point we'll see if we can get some people on video. Just a second.